A fourth identification has been made for the Fort Myers 8. Before I address the newest identification, here is a rundown on the case and the 3 prior identified people. In March of 2007, a land surveyor was examining a lot of about 10 acres. This was located in Fort Myers, Florida. He was standing not far from the dirt road leading into the area when he discovered a skull that was partially buried in the earth. When the police arrived, much to their horror, they found that others were also buried in the area. It was more than just one man. Eventually, they unearthed the remains of 8 men. It was a major case, and over the years, law enforcement has worked hard to discover both who these men were and what happened for them to end up where they did. Although I guess the answer of why is never really answered, because why does somebody do this? Further complicating the matter was that there was no personal items or clothing found anywhere near. It was a difficult situation, and with nothing to really identify the men or any clues to who did this, these men seemed doomed to go unidentified. 3 of these men were actually identified pretty early on. It always makes it easier if people have gone missing from that same area. It's much harder when the area is wider. The first identification happened 8 months after the 8 men were found, identifying him as John Blevins. John had lived a transient lifestyle, and as such, he was at a greater risk for something happening to him, unfortunately. He was known to be around the Fort Myers area, and his criminal record was just for minor offenses like loitering, and he was in possession of drug paraphernalia. The other offense was solicitation of offering his services to others. It appears he may have been living with his mother, who mentioned that he had told her prior that he planned to go out and return shortly, but he never did. However, she didn't report him missing. It's believed he was last seen in 1995, which means he would likely have been where he was found for 12 years. While these men were identified quickly, turns out they'd been missing for a long time. Eric David Kohler was just 21 when he went missing, and he would be the second man identified. He too was identified after 8 months. He has the least bit of information available about himself or his situation. We know he hails from Port Charlotte, which is in Florida, and that, just like John, he went missing in 1995. Unlike John, it appears Eric was reported missing, and a photograph was provided by his family, who did know that he was in the area. It's likely he was similarly troubled or at risk, as it appears the current picture was of arrest of some kind. But just remember, this doesn't define who they were. Some people have more struggles than others do. The third identification at the time was that of Jonathan Tahey. Jonathan was reported missing after a year. It would turn out he was 24 when his life was taken, and he disappeared from the same area in October of 1995. So while he was found in 2007, his life was likely taken 12 years prior, as was the case with the other 2 men that were identified. It also gave detectives a little bit of an indication how long they'd been there and hopefully would help identify the other men. Sadly, by the time Jonathan was identified, his mother had passed away. As soon as it came out that authorities thought that body might belong to that of Jonathan Tahey, his half-sister came forward. She gave her DNA, and it appeared he was, in fact, related to her. So then they exhumed the mother, and they tested the DNA against that of the son. It was, in fact, Jonathan Tahey. It would turn out that Jonathan was born in 1970 in Aurora, Illinois. He had lived most of his life in Florida. However, at one point, he'd been back to Illinois attending West Aurora High School between 1985 and 1987. He faced difficulty holding jobs, and he had some clashes with the law. He had called his mother in October of 1995 requesting some money. It's not clear if she agreed, but this was the last time she heard from him. While Jonathan found himself wanted for probation violations, he was never officially reported missing. The probation violation in this case would be the reason he was likely identified. So while the identifications were made of 3 men, 5 would remain unidentified. As we now know, 1995 is when these 3 men went missing. The others likely went missing around the same time. Now, we finally have a 4th victim identified. Bobby Sodden was known as Victim H for the last 15 years. Robert went by the name Bobby, and he was 30 years old when he went missing from Fort Myers, Florida in 1996. Bobby was identified with the help of the Florida Department of Law Enforcement and Parabon nanolabs, who have been an incredible asset in the identification of John and Jane Does. I wish I could tell you more about Bobby. I feel like he deserves better than what little I know. The case is more muddled than I try to usually present, but there are others in this case that deserve a chance to be identified also. Because they crossed paths with the man who took their lives, it might help with identification. So I just want to touch on a moment on Daniel Crimehound. He's presumed to be responsible for a separate group of victims known as the Hog Trail cases. They took place in Florida between 1993 and 1996. Those men thankfully have been identified. Crimehound was incarcerated and sentenced to death for taking the life of Richard Montgomery. I'll provide some links below for those that are interested in the brutality of Crimehound. I don't want to glorify it. He was identified with the help of a man named Stanley Burden, who thankfully escaped from Crimehound alive. And this area that he escaped in was only 1 mile from where the Fort Myers 8 were found. These men share a lot in common with the other group. All were male transients. The previous group disappeared between 1993 and 1996 in Charlotte County or Sarasota County, Florida. The group we are dealing with here disappeared so far between 1996 and 1997. While the former Navy veteran was also a licensed LPN, he was arrested for taking only the life of 1 man. He's never been tried for the other cases, although they have long believed he was the one to blame. Unfortunately, while the last Hog Trail John Doe was identified last year, there are still 4 men from the Fort Myers 8 who are John Does. Families looking for these men would be looking for someone who went missing in 1996 or 1997, or at least those are the likely dates, and it's likely they went missing from Florida. Bobby Sodden went unidentified for 15 years, and he was missing from his family for 26. Had he lived, he would be 56 today. The Jellicoe Jane Doe, 1985, identified as Tracy Walker. Tracy Sue Walker was 15 when she disappeared in 1978 from Lafayette, Indiana. It was every parent's worst nightmare. In the case of Tracy, she'd run away before, which always makes police a little less interested in trying to help find her. Once they're deemed a habitual runaway, it's assumed they'll come back. On that day, she was hanging out with a friend at Tippecanoe Mall in Lafayette, Indiana. After this point, she was never seen again. Her mother would place a missing persons report right away, but it's believed she was branded delinquent and wasn't searched for. Both of these reports would eventually be lost, with someone in the department saying that they suspect it landed somewhere in county records, where it was eventually misplaced. One thing is for sure that no matter where the missing person report went, the careless disregard for the police placement of the report would likely result in a family going 44 years without an answer. In all fairness, Tracy was 366 miles away at that time, so it's likely no match would have been made right away. After all, we're talking separate states. The issue, however, is that the jurisdictions where missing persons reports were handled well ended up in NamUs. This is the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System. A lot of these reports had been entered by around 2010, which is about 3 years after the database started. Jurisdictions all over the United States were carefully inputting their missing persons cases. Unfortunately for some of these Jane and John Does, others wouldn't input them, and some didn't even know where the reports were. They'd been lost over time. It would mean that these older cases of John and Jane Does still would not have a missing persons report to match them to, which is extra sad if a parent or a family member actually did place a report. Anytime all the pieces were there but not put together means that a family goes years without answers. The truth of the matter is that Tracy was found in 1985 in the Big Wheel Gap area of Elk Valley in Campbell County, just north of Knoxville, Tennessee. Officers tried to identify her, but without a missing person report to match, Their ability to make the match was limited to fingerprints or blood typing. DNA itself wasn't available back then. Well, there was what I would deem careless disregard by the police in Lafayette, Indiana. That can't be said for the officers that found Tracy. They did everything they could to try to identify her. They gave her the nickname Baby Girl. To those police, she mattered, and that's why I think a missing persons report might have actually made a difference earlier than normal. The police were very motivated to return her name to her, and they did everything they could, but unfortunately, they just didn't have a lot of good options. A lot of the John and Jane Doe cases end up highlighting poor police work, but it also highlights that maybe just as many do everything they can in their power to try to return a name to a Jane or John Doe. It takes priority, and they go above and beyond. It's easy to see why they were touched by this case, too, because it was startling. Tracy was found abandoned in a garbage dumping area near an abandoned mine shaft, and only a partial amount of her bones were even found. This would amount to 32 bones total. The human body actually contains 206 bones, so they found very few. They did make a note that it had to be someone with local information that placed her where she was because the road wasn't easy to find. By the time she was found, Tracy had been missing for 7 years. Isotope testing done on the young Jane Doe suggested she lived in Florida or Central Texas, and then moved somewhere else in the country. They believed she'd possibly lived in the Midwest, Rocky Mountains, or the Southwest or Pacific Coast states. They said that she was likely not in Tennessee for very long. We know now that she was a runaway, and it's impossible to know what happened in that 7-year gap. This was the time between her disappearing and being found, so it's impossible to know exactly when she had passed away or how long she was traveling out there. That's why it's really important that anyone with knowledge on her movements calls the police. Tracy Sue Walker was missing for 44 years. She went unidentified as a Jane Doe for 37. She was 15 when she went missing. Had she lived her life, she would be 59 today. That's it for today. Thank you so much to everybody commenting. Even with just an emoji, it really has made a big difference. The current goal for the channel is 20,000 subscribers, but we aren't even halfway there as I record this. So if you enjoy the content here and you're not sure, take a peek to see if you're subscribed. Please consider subscribing and hitting the bell so you don't miss new episodes. Thanks, everybody. Take care of yourselves and each other.